This is Back to Back.
Yo, what's up, back-to-backers? This is Willy Joy. Welcome to the show. This is Back to Back. This is my podcast. You doing all right? You feeling good? You have a good week? I'm doing great. Recording this actually in my living room. Beautiful day, sun streaming through the windows. I had a good week, productive week in the studio. Still had a chance to go out, saw some live comedy. You know, I always talk about on this show the importance of just being able to be a fan of something, to still have a hobby. Comedy is definitely that for me. So that was great, inspiring, refreshing. I felt great getting back into the studio. And this is a really fun episode today. I've got Dani Deahl on the show. My old friend Dani Deahl, straight out of Chicago. She is an excellent DJ, producer. She's also a music journalist. She writes for The Verge about the intersection of music and technology. And if that wasn't enough, she's also the vice president of the Chicago chapter for the Recording Academy. That's the Grammys. So she works with the Grammys. Man, there was a lot to talk about. And right now, Dani's working on an amazing video series for The Verge called The Future of Music. Season 2 of The Future of Music is dropping this August on The Verge's YouTube channel. Keep your eyes peeled for that. And in the meantime, you got to go check out the first season. It's an amazing video series that Dani puts together, talking to some of the most interesting artists who are kind of working on the cutting edge of technology and music, changing the way music is performed and experienced. In the first season, there are videos about virtual reality raves, AI-composed pop songs, really interesting stuff. So go check out season 1. Watch out for season 2 coming this August. And I'm going to tell you more about what Dani's up to in just a minute. We are brought to you today by my friends over at Serato, and I just can't say enough about Serato, one of the premier companies making software for DJs and producers. So many of your favorite artists used or have used Serato. They've been in the game for over 10 years. I've been using their products for forever. They're always innovating. One of my favorite companies out there for musicians. But even if you're not a DJ, I want to talk to you today about Serato DJ Lite. This is their entry-level software, and you can go online and get it for free right now. If you don't know anything about DJing, and if you're even just a little bit curious, you can go on Serato.com right now, grab a copy of Serato DJ Lite. In just minutes, you can be playing the songs you love, the music that's on your computer. For anyone who's ever been curious about what it's like to DJ and maybe doesn't even know how to get started, this is the perfect way. Go to Serato.com. Check them out, Serato DJ Lite. Such a great, fun piece of software. Play around, have some fun with your friends. Mixing tunes is the best, man. It's why I do this show. It's why we're all here. So get into it. Serato.com. All right. I hope everybody enjoyed last week's episode with Grizz. That was one of my recent favorites, man. Everything's been going great for a while, but it really does feel like we're picking up some momentum. I'm talking to people I just wouldn't have been able to talk to a year ago. Just people a little outside of my world, outside of my friend group. And I don't think that really would have been possible without all the support that the show has been getting from this community, from you, from the listeners. So shout out to all of you, and an especially big shout out if you're one of the people who's helping to spread the word of this show. That is the best way you can support Back to Back. You know, every time I see somebody put up a post, tag me in their story, whatever it might be, just to let other people know to check out the show, that they're enjoying it. It just makes me smile, man, because it reminds me of the community that's come up around this show that really just makes me happy every single week that I do this. It's the reason I keep doing it. And I'll always interact with anything you're putting out there, whether it's replying, reposting, just talking to you guys, that's the best part of this for me. And don't forget, you can always reach out to me as well. backtobackpod@gmail.com is the email address. Send me your questions, your concerns. If you make art, send me your art. Whatever it is, I want to talk to you. And you can hit me up on social media at Willy Joy or at backtobackpod are the accounts. Cool? All right. So for this conversation with Dani Deahl, I spent a week out in Chicago. We met up at her apartment out there. It really brought me back, man. I've known Dani for over a decade. We kind of started off around the same time. We really started becoming professionals and building up our career in Chicago in the mid to late 2000s. So we just have all this history to talk about. All these shared connections. Beyond just being a great DJ, producer, etc., Dani's become a force in the world of journalism. She was working with DJ Mag for a while. Now she's writing for The Verge, one of the premier technology outlets out there. And she's writing about the intersection of music and technology. She's doing important work that I think a lot of musicians and a lot of fans just need to know about. No one else is telling these stories. And we get into this in the conversation. But she also just got elected to be the vice president of the Chicago chapter of the Recording Academy, which is the Grammys. And she's doing a lot of work there to get more artists involved with the Recording Academy and really just education to artists about how Grammys work. And I think really overall, what I walked away from this conversation realizing is just a lot of her work overall is just about helping the community, shedding light on things that people might not understand, and really just helping artists navigate through the minefield that is the industry. She's doing really important work, and I think you're going to find this conversation really interesting. Also, I want to note, we were recording in her apartment in Chicago, and summer in Chicago, man, the weather can be kind of crazy. At a certain point, the sky behind us, the sky outside the window just opened up, and it was the biggest thunderstorm I've seen in a long time, just out of nowhere. It happened for like 15 minutes, and then it was gone. It do be like that in Chicago sometimes. You're going to hear some noise from that storm for a couple minutes. So that's what it is. Don't worry. We survived. I'm fine. I appreciate your concern. All right, so check it out. This is me and Dani Deahl back to back. Let's go. Say you go to a NAMM conference or something like that. How do you decide, if you're writing for The Verge, how do you decide, what is worthy of a story and sort of what is your relationship with The Verge? Like, do you get pitch stories? Do you pitch to them?
Oh my gosh. My inbox is a hellfire right now. I get so many pitches, it's probably impossible for me to zero inbox at this point.
Yeah. Well, because you occupy sort of a unique space, I think, right? Where there's sort of who else would they try to pitch to? Mm-hmm. I feel like you, for better or for worse, it just all comes to your desk.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I do. So I cover the intersection of music and tech, but then also music and policy. And those can be two very nuanced spaces to talk about. And there aren't a lot of people that talk about those two things with a level of knowledge that I think they require. There are topics that I've covered where I've seen major publications try to tackle the issue and they get fundamental factual errors wrong. But that's because it's so Byzantine and complex.
Right.
It's
and
hard.
This is before we started recording, we were talking about, how little the general population of the music industry actually knows, right? Mm-hmm. About how the machinery of, say, publishing or just even label.
What even is publishing?
Right. Have you figured it out?
Mechanics of these certain arms aside, most people that are putting out music do not understand the differences in copyright with their music. They don't understand all of the societies they need to sign up with. They don't understand the difference between royalties. And there are all of these companies that are working on solutions for people to put music out more immediately, more quickly, and without any barrier. But
Right.
no one is educating all of these new creators in the process.
And how did you start to become interested in those kind of issues? Was it based off of, personal experiences that you had in the past?
I think a lot of those stories came to me. So part of The Verge is that we tackle, very much we are a consumer tech publication.
Right.
So everything that I write about with music has to touch on policy or technology in some tangential manner. And I get a lot of access because of The Verge. We're the largest.
It's a big name.
Yeah, we get 60 million uniques a month.
Ooh.
That's I won't name names, but pretty much any other website that you can think of that would be comparable, we beat them in terms of traffic. So people set up and pay attention. And that gives me access to a lot of executives, a lot of behind the scenes people that I would not previously have access to. And so I just became curious and I started asking questions. And also being on the board for the Recording Academy has been a really great resource because I get access again to engineers and managers and lawyers and all of these people that operate in different fields.
Sure. And that's another example of, the Recording Academy, the Grammys, like that's another giant thing that, of course, everybody knows about. But again, very few people understand how it works or really even anything about it.
Right. So over the past year, I've been thrust into all of these topics that deal with behind the curtain, with what happens with Oz behind everything.
So, I mean, let's get into it for a second, in terms of, say, the work you've done with Verge and the stories you've been writing. Are there any sort of major nuggets of information that you've came across that seem like, oh, everybody should know this, but nobody does, like they really stuck out to you?
So many.
What's the first one that comes to your mind?
The SoundCloud contract.
Okay.
From last year, when SoundCloud made their self-monetization program public and someone sent the contract to me. They didn't know if it was good or bad. They just thought maybe I should take a look at it.
Right.
And I'm not entirely versed in what a contract should or should not look like. So I sent it to a lawyer and I said, should this be concerning? And all the alarm bells went off. So I took it to another lawyer and a third, and everyone said, this is dire. This is awful, and people should not be signing this. And
so what was in the contract?
There was a covenant. There was a covenant not to sue, first of all, that existed beyond the expiry of the contract.
Yeah.
So even if you ended self-monetization of contract, you still could not sue them for any reason or aid or abet anyone else that wanted to sue them for misuse of your content.
Right.
Until you die.
Yeah, in perpetuity, for any reason,
right.
Yeah.
Which likely would have not held up in many EU courts, but shouldn't have been there to begin with. And there were also a lot of variables that shouldn't have been there. They reserved the right to change the percentage of payout to you at any time without notifying you. It was your responsibility to check the contract from time to time on the website.
Which, of course, no one would ever do.
No one would ever do. So we did this big report, and SoundCloud pulled the contract and rewrote it over the weekend in 48 hours and replaced it.
Which is amazing to see. And like that, to me, is such a cool example of how advocating artists can actually affect real change, right? Like I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and this is a total tangent, but with all the terrible abortion shit that's being passed in Alabama and Missouri. And, there's this big public outcry, at least, on my feeds, because I'm a liberal person with a lot of liberal friends. So I'm seeing all this outcry. But then to me, I'm like, well, what? I don't know if this is actually changing it, right?
Right.
And, I think, say, donating to the ACLU is that could maybe help more. But I'm relating it back to what you're talking about, where that's an example of outcry, like public outcry, and someone actually putting up the flag and actually doing the research and figuring out what it looks like, where actual change happened. And that kind of gives me hope that, it's...
But to your point, a very integral part of that is the outcry, is people speaking up. And if we don't have people speaking up, then there is little or less incentive for someone with the right kind of power to do anything about it.
Yeah, that's a good, it's just, I guess you're right. It's an amplifier. It's a megaphone to reach maybe the people who wouldn't have been reached before.
Right. How would any of us know that it's a problem that's affecting a lot of people unless people are talking about it?
Yeah, it's true. So as far as the Grammys, the Recording Academy, how did you start working with them?
They recruited me. They scouted me and asked me to become a voting member. So I applied, got accepted. And then they scouted me to also be on the board to run for the Chicago chapter, which is, I always have to put this aside. It's not necessarily a misnomer, but the Chicago chapter actually covers 14 Midwest states.
Okay.
So we cover Minnesota, we cover Wisconsin.
And does that mean, just so we're clear, like when you say we cover the states, what does that mean really?
So there are different chapters all across the U.S.
Right.
And each chapter is, I would say, responsible for reaching the community of voting members that are under their governance, trying to figure out what their needs are, meeting those needs, relaying their concerns, providing services that might be useful to them, and having an active line of communication.
What might those services be? Like what's an example
thing,
of? Yeah.
I always try to tell people this. I don't know if you've heard of Music Cares.
Maybe? I have.
Okay.
Yeah. Amazing organization.
Yeah. A lot of people know them as the earplug people because they set up shop at a lot of festivals. They provide free earplugs to people, custom molded earplugs. And that's only one component of what Music Cares does. And a lot of what they do, it's generally a safety net in general for musicians in a time of need.
Yeah.
So whether you need to go to rehab or your gear was stolen on the road, or you have an unexpected hospital bill, as long as you can prove that you've been a part of the music industry for 5 years, they will take care of those expenses for you. You don't have to be a voting member of the Academy.
Right.
And they've never run out of money.
Which is amazing. I mean, yeah, they came up when I first started talking about mental health on this show a lot. Somebody else told me about them and I looked into it. Yeah, I mean, it's really... And there's another great example, right, of a resource that is already available that I don't know that a lot of people are aware of.
There are many resources available for artists that they aren't aware of. I think Music Cares is a really great one because a lot of us maybe don't have medical insurance or have bad medical insurance. And so when we incur a hospital bill, there's this oh shit moment and what do I do? And there are organizations like Music Cares that can help. And then there's also another organization I like to let people know about. That's the LCA, the Lawyers for the Creative Arts. And they will work for artists pro bono. You just pay $50. You fill out some forms and they will give you legal advice on contracts, licensing, anything that you need.
Amazing. I'm really glad we're getting that out there too. I didn't know they existed. There you go.
Yeah.
And I should have known that.
And they're based here in Chicago.
Oh, cool. And you're born and raised in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Do you think you'd ever, I mean, you seem like such a pillar here and you always have. I mean, do you think you would ever, was there ever a thought of leaving at any point?
Yeah. But I travel so much. Sometimes it feels like it doesn't matter where I live. And it's nice to come home. And I do feel a lot of love toward this city. And
I do too. I miss it.
Do you?
Ever since I moved away, I miss it, yeah. Like we were saying before we started recording, both you and I kind of move a lot and we bounce around a lot. And I've lived in a bunch of different cities, but the only one other than, the city I was born in, Chicago's the only place that felt like home. Yeah, and it still does, like every time I come back.
Yeah, it's a big little city.
It is. And yeah, it's, I'm a Midwest boy too, so it makes sense. I feel comfortable
for
here.
Sure.
So what was it like, growing up in Chicago? What were some of your early exposure to the scene here? Because I think the Chicago music scene and the history in it, you can draw parallels, but there's nothing else really like it in the country.
Yeah, I started going to metal shows and screamo shows at the Fireside Bowl.
Sure.
Yeah.
At what age about?
Maybe 14, 15.
Okay.
Yeah. Dillinger Escape Plan, that kind of stuff.
And the Fireside Bowl, for those who may not know, I mean...
this level of assumption I have.
No. I mean, I like talking about it because it's such a weird place. I mean, it's an old bowling alley that would do these sort of like...
Right. There's no way this could have been legal.
No way.
They just had that plastic construction fencing up to sort of make sure that people would stay in the right area and not wander onto the actual lanes themselves. But these were like thrash shows. People were having mosh pits and fights and people were bleeding and somehow...
Oh, man, yeah. And it was very punk and DIY feeling and somehow not shut down for many years.
Right?
I remember I had friends who were going to college in Chicago and I came and visited and we went and saw Wesley Willis there. And that, even though Wesley Willis is not like heavy music, of course, he has this cult following and people were super rowdy. And it's just like every night that place was getting destroyed.
I know. The stuff we used to get away with.
What kind of a kid were you?
Introverted, picked on, no friends.
So was music kind of that escape, that release for you?
Yeah, I didn't fit in at school. And so the only place I could go to where I could try to fit in or at least have nobody direct any bad attention toward me.
Sure.
I mean, that was really like the bare minimum goal.
Yeah. You can just get to zero.
Right.
Like,
was to go to shows and then eventually raves.
And what were the early raves you went to like around here? Because I was born and raised in Minnesota and I was going to rave. I think we're about the same age. So I feel like we were probably going to similar types of events. Yeah.
And it's really interesting now because I think a lot of people that have gotten into that community in the past 5 years or so, those folks probably describe a rave very differently from what you and I would
1,000%
describe a rave as. So people go to Insomniac shows, for example, right?
Yeah, these giant corporate festivals.
And they call that a rave.
Right.
And to me, a rave is, well, maybe I picked up a flyer in my local store and there's a phone number and that phone number is probably only active 24 hours before the event. Maybe there's a checkpoint. Maybe that phone number doesn't even give me the address of where the party is. And I have to go to some random 7-Eleven to get the address for where I have to go.
Yep.
And then it's likely in a warehouse or an old abandoned skating rink.
Yeah, in some sketchy part of town.
Maybe they have warm water if I'm lucky.
Right. Yeah, and like the only thing available is like some weird looking guy selling like, his homemade energy drink.
Yes.
With God knows what in it.
Yep.
Yeah.
The good old days.
They kind of were though, because I had a similar experience. I mean, going to those events, it really did feel like it was a relief because I was like, oh, there's other worlds out there. Like I don't have to just stick to this one that I don't feel like I fit into that well.
And at that time, I mean, it was not as popular. That
Yes.
music was not as popular. That scene was demonized very viciously by the news cycle. And the people that were throwing those parties and by and large going to those parties were misfits.
Yes. Oh, 100%. I was one of those misfits. I mean, that's another sort of funny example of then and now is you think about, at your high school, like I was one of, 2 or 3 kids out of like a big high school who would go to these events and everyone else is like, you're going to what? That's so weird. And now like a modern high schooler, I think, it's mainstream culture. It's like, it's weird if you didn't go to that.
Right.
I mean, I sort of wonder where, this is another tangent, but, in this era of corporate festivals and mainstream attention and the spotlight being on dance music, are the misfits and the underground kids and the people who kind of need a space, like,
there's always spaces for them.
Of course, but I guess, and this is just sort of me being older and more ignorant, but I don't exactly know where those spaces are as much as I used to.
I wouldn't call it ignorance. I think when you were motivated to find out where those spaces were,
sure,
you spent the time and the energy to find out where they existed.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's more just that I wish I knew more,
I'll do a little research and hook you up.
Okay, you let me know. Well, Chicago has always had a strong underground scene, right?
And very robust after-hours scene.
Is it still that way to
yes.
this day? Because I remember, back, say 10 years ago when all of us were here and kind of all of us were, whatever you want to say, making our name and really coming up and starting to be professionals. Mm-hmm. It was every night you could go out to some warehouse till 8 a.m.
Yeah. Last year, there was a party that was being thrown here with the Headless Horseman, who's a techno artist that I really enjoy. And I tried DMing him on Instagram because the address wasn't available anywhere. And he didn't respond. And I was scouring all over the boards. And I found out who threw the party, but they didn't respond. And I wound up finding a phone number that I would have to call. And I was like, wow,
it's so
I haven't
nostalgic.
had to do that. Yeah, I haven't had to put this much effort into attending a party in so long.
Did you make it?
No.
Amazing. So to take it back for a second, so you're going to these metal shows, you're going to these raves, and very much in the scene of the moment. When did you start thinking you wanted to be involved as more than just an attendee? Like, were you musical as a kid? Did you play instruments or do any of that? Yeah,
my parents had us do piano lessons growing up.
Were they musical?
Oh, hell no. No. My mom cannot carry a tune whatsoever. But yeah, we had lessons. I think that wasn't with any goal of having us be musical.
Sure.
I think it was just one of those things that most kids did growing up, was have piano lessons. And it got to a point where my brother started to get into the music as well, though he was in a different side. He was more invested in drum and bass, and like Ram Records was his shit.
Yeah. Shout out to Andy C, man.
Yeah. And
legends.
Exactly. So my parents got him a set of turntables, these really terrible belt drive Newmarks, and I wanted to practice on them. And so
Older brother?
Younger brother.
But
we're about the same age, 18 months apart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we shared those turntables, and I wound up just getting some of my own records, and I would go to Gramophone every week, take the bus and take my allowance.
Legendary record store here, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And started accumulating a small collection, not with any intention of playing out, but just because I really liked the music and I just thought it was fun to learn how to play on my own. I wound up mailing out for Faust and Shorty's VHS tape on how to scratch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would sit there and play it and then rewind the tape and play it again.
Was that like a out of the back of a magazine or something?
Yep.
You ordered it? God,
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Really dating myself here.
But no, this is what we used to have to do. This is what everyone had to do.
There were no YouTube tutorials.
No, there was no YouTube.
Right? What's a YouTube?
Yeah.
One thing that I'm really grateful for in terms of how I learned was that I find that I'm incredibly adaptable now. So it doesn't matter what piece of equipment you put in front of me. I can figure out how to use it in 10 minutes. Give me CDJs, give me turntables, give me a laptop. It doesn't matter. I can play on all of them. I can troubleshoot this stuff.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah. And do you think those kind of skills were built off the fact that, we didn't always have easy access to the tutorial?
I had to spend a lot of time to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
A lot of active listening, a lot of active practicing, and no software that was going to fill in any of those gaps for me.
Well, and it seems like you've always been sort of a tech-minded person, right? Like I think about, there was some video you posted of you, like soldering circuits and building, literally building synthesizers and all that kind of. Were you always that way as far as, actually wanting to get inside of something, see how it all works, look at the back end? Yeah.
And my parents, bless them, they saw that in me early on. And so they gave me a copy of Logic as a gift one year when I was still in high school. And they really helped to...
That's huge.
Yeah. They helped to nurture that in me. They were always very supportive of it.
What did they do?
They're in a creative field. So they owned a very large production commercial production company together.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, my mom was the executive producer. My dad was the director. And so they did a lot of tabletop stuff, which means product shots. He was the guy that made the Subway sandwiches look pretty.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that because I always wonder, like, whose job is that to arrange the sandwich?
Yeah. My brother and I would totally get roped into that when we were younger, and we would earn our allowance by working on sorting cornflakes, for example.
No way.
Yeah, for commercials.
To find the most attractive cornflakes. Incredible. But okay, so I really love that though, because that's, to tie that back into the music world, like that's a great example of that is creative work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's artistic work to, design a well set up shot that is aesthetically pleasing. Like it's not something that everyone can do. It takes a certain skill, but that kind of work, like I relate that to the music industry where there's so many different lanes and avenues that are open to somebody who likes music, who's passionate about music. And that's something I always try to advocate too, is that, there's not just the one path. Like there's so many different ways that people can.
Sure. I think it's harder for people to discover what those other lanes are though.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, even for like something like you're doing, where you've kind of managed to create this cool hybrid of, journalist, artist, advocate. Yeah, that's a great word. And sort of define your own space for it. I mean, I guess I'm curious. So I know you did a blog. You had the D Squared blog, right? Mm-hmm. For years and years and years. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe that was sort of the entry point to what would then become, the journalistic side of your career, or did it start even earlier than that?
Yeah, it started earlier than that. It started really when I was dating a house DJ named Mark Almeria ages ago, and Herb magazine was a big thing at the time. URB, not HERB, URB.
People don't know about Herb anymore, but that used to be that was gospel. Like the only magazine. Yeah,
yeah, print magazine. Couldn't wait to get it every month, and I pitched Mark and I as a feature for a Valentine's Day issue, and they bit. And so they sent over the questions and I interviewed us and then I self-edited the whole thing and then sent back a tidy little package because I didn't know that wasn't my responsibility. I just...
Right. What they were expecting was that you would just sort of write, whatever answers in whatever format you wanted. And
right.
It would
send something back messy and they would clean it up. But I'm maybe a little... OCD in that manner, and I wanted to make sure everything was as perfect as possible.
It's like sorting the cornflakes, man.
It is, right? Oh my gosh, it's my parents' fault. And so they then offered me a job, and they said, "Do you want to do some freelance pieces because you obviously show some really good initiative here?" So I
And was this before or after you started the blog?
This is before the blog.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was the first time I really wrote professionally for any sort of outlet. And because it was in print, it was really interesting because I would send stuff in and then I wouldn't get any reviews on the edit. I would just have to wait until I got the print publication and then I would compare what was printed with what I'd sent in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to see what changes they made and I would adapt and learn from that.
Interesting. So do you think that was just because Herb was somewhat disorganized? Like that there was...
Who knows?
The communication was bad?
It was probably a small team.
Yeah. I mean, I know it was because I know some of those people back in the day.
Right. And those people are doing amazing work now.
Absolutely.
Raymond Roker is doing great work with Golden Voice now. I mean, the history of the people that come out of that publication.
Yeah, no, it's one of those places where, you can sort of draw lines to the people who are very influential in the modern day scene that all kind of came out of that.
Right. Very culture minded, very aware.
Yeah. I mean, I'll always have love for Herb because they were the first like real publication to show me any attention and any love. And I mean, and I'm not the only one, like I think a lot of artists could say that.
I was the first person to interview Wolfgang Gartner and did it for...
Oh, there you go.
For Herb. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a perfect example of, they were just on top of it somehow in a way that a lot of other publications were not. And did you have any writing experience before that? Just like personal? Would you journal or anything like that?
Oh my gosh, yes. Filled up an insane amount of journals and went to Duke University every summer for writing camp.
Oh, okay.
Which is so dorky.
Oh, that's awesome.
I did not go to cool camps. I went to writing camp and I went to MIDI camp.
Wait, MIDI camp?
Yes, at Oberlin.
Whoa, wait, what is MIDI camp? That's not a camp I knew existed.
Yeah, shocker, I was the only girl.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, but no, it was cool. We learned Max this was way before Max was integrated with Ableton.
Right.
And existed in its own little universe.
Yeah,
and
when it was just Max MSP.
Right.
Yeah.
When it was just the white screen and the black little boxes and you would draw.
Yeah. I studied that in college, weirdly enough, like again, before it was integrated with Ableton. And for anybody listening who doesn't know what we're talking about.
I feel like we just keep talking about stuff without any context.
Well, yeah, I try to fill in the blanks, but
you're very good at that.
Thank you. But Max MSP, it's weird to even try to explain. I mean, it's basically a visual programming language that has mainly applications in the audio field, right? And so you could it's a language, so you could program whatever you wanted, right? Like you could program an oscillator that you would feed in audio to it and it would modify the sound, or you could do literally anything, but it was complicated. It's hard to do. I was never very good at it.
Yeah.
And now Max has since been integrated into Ableton Live and is way easier to use.
Right, which is incredible too, because there's this robust third-party marketplace now where everybody makes these Max modules and you can find exactly what you need.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And even artists can make their own tools that they can use in Ableton. Like a good buddy of mine, shout out to Jay Fay, just sent me this Max plugin that he made called Chain Shaper, which is probably the best like sidechain utility I've ever used. Like it's so much better than all the big name stuff. And it's just like he made it in his room out in, I think he's still in St. Louis, but like, I don't know, stuff like that is so cool to me because it just levels the playing field. And I think as an artist, he more or less was just like, I wish there was a tool that did blank. Right. And then he could just make it.
Yeah.
Like that didn't used to be a thing we could do. And yeah, shout out to Chain Shaper. If you're a producer, you need to go check that out.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. It's dope. And okay, so MIDI camp. Go to MIDI camp, go to writing camp.
It all makes sense. Those are the two things I do now.
Yeah, basically.
This is so crazy though. I just never really thought about, I've talked about the fact that I went to writing camps before, and I've talked about the fact that I went to MIDI camp. But when I think about everything in context now, this is probably the first conversation I've had where I'm seeing these two parallels that have existed in my life from when I was a kid. That's wild. Right.
And I would imagine it must have been an unconscious thing for a while too, right? Like, was there a point in your career, and I'm maybe projecting because in my career for so long, I had blinders on as far as what the end result of all my hard work was going to be. Like I was going to be like this one thing. And I had this one singular vision of like what success would look like for me. And if it looked like anything else, I was disappointed. Then I'm talking like very early years. And then at a certain point, you kind of realize that, oh no, success takes many forms and you can make happiness be happy in so many different ways as long as you are open to all the opportunities. It's what we were talking about before. There's so many opportunities out there. For you, I guess I'm curious, was there a point, like, did you ever feel that way? Like you were striving for, just this one, like, I have to be X amount famous DJ and nothing else is acceptable.
I lived in that mindset for so many years. Yeah, I was trapped by that mindset.
Right, me too.
For so many years. I think that's probably a more accurate word. It's not even something that I was striving for. I couldn't see an alternative. And so I was trapped with what I thought I was supposed to do and didn't think about the fact that there were other options or avenues that I could pursue.
And was there any single moment you can point to that sort of changed the way you thought about it, or was it more of kind of a gradual thing?
I think it was gradual. I think it started, the first inkling of it was probably the TED Talk that I did. And
Talk about that for a second.
let's talk about the talk.
Yeah. Because I remember when you did that, but that was a few years ago now, right?
2014.
Okay, yeah. So refresh my memory, like, what was the talk? What were you talking about?
It was called Women, STEM, and EDM. And it was about why there are not a lot of women that are participating in the production space. I'm sure the numbers have changed a little bit, but they're probably similar to what they were at the time.
Not great.
At the time, it was 93% of recorded dance music that was released was made by men.
God, that's staggering.
And I'm sure that has not changed by much.
Not significantly.
Right. And so the whole point of the talk was, well, why is that? And we have to look at the social constructs that exist that support a certain type of person to be successful. And it's not that women aren't interested in it or they don't have the capacity to do it. There are these very deep, long-reaching, entrenched values that support certain people and do not support other people. Yeah. And I got a lot of vitriol from people online after that was published, and that made me double down.
Yeah. Right.
Because very, very obviously people did not understand or have the capacity to even try and see things from a different perspective.
Because it's been the one way for so long, right?
It's never not been that way.
Right. Yeah. You had, so when I knew I was coming to talk to you, I always, read up a little bit, and I was looking at some old interviews, and you had one quote that I thought really crystallized. It was just a very easy to understand thing, and I'm paraphrasing, but you were basically talking about how as club goers, like just attendees, women are commodified so differently than men in a nightclub environment, right? So there's like ladies' night, ladies free, it's like even as a guy, if you're going to some high-end club, you're like, oh, well, we should bring a girl so we can get in faster, So like women are this commodity, right? And then you say, okay, so this is in this environment, this is just ingrained in everybody. Like we all know this is how it works.
Right.
So of course that mentality is going to then just get slid over when we're talking about female artists, female producers, DJs, all of that. And that to me is so obviously true, but I'd never thought about, because it's just a perfect example. Because of course, if we all grew up going to these clubs and understanding this is how this world works, then just naturally that's what everyone is going to think should happen with artists too, right?
Right. Very clearly, I would prefer that women's nights or free for women would just go away completely at clubs.
Yeah.
I would prefer that everybody pay $5 at the door and just be done with it. Because the moment you create that separation, then women very obviously are the product the moment they step foot inside of that club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And do you think like that kind of mentality, like you were talking about 93% of the recorded music is by men. Do you think that mentality, it must affect not only the way men are looking at women, but also the way women are perceiving themselves,
Sure. Right. If you don't see people in positions of power or people that look like you on stage, it's very hard to envision yourself occupying that same space. And that goes across any minority, not just women, but
absolutely
LGBTQ artists and artists of color, and they're all underrepresented. And
even more so in this day and age where, again, we were talking about sort of the mainstreamification of dance music. All of a sudden, this culture that comes from minority culture, right? Whether it's queer culture or female or minority, whatever it is, all of a sudden, white men more or less are like, oh yeah, that's cool. We'll do that now. Yeah. and all of a sudden, that's why I was talking about spaces earlier, right? I'm sure you're right that they still do exist, but to me, it's like, I always wish there was, that I knew how to help more in the mainstream. Because that, for me, it's like, I don't like necessarily, I understand why there's a separation of the underground and the mainstream, but as somebody who participates in the mainstream, and like I am a white dude, for me, I want to make sure that as much as possible, we can still support the people who allowed us to have this culture in the first place. You know?
I think you do a good job with the spaces that you own, with representing people where you can, giving them voice where you can.
Sure.
Right? And that's all I think any of us can ask of the people that are in positions of power, have the ability to make decisions, is to use their voice or to consider that they have the space and the opportunity to put shine on someone else, or to make someone feel safe enough in their own creative efforts to do something they might not otherwise do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. And it's certainly intention is 99% of it, you know, and I think you can tell. Even like, again, this has just been on my mind because this abortion shit is happening right now. And, you know, again, I'm seeing a bunch of people speaking out, and a lot of men, maybe for the first time, being like, oh, this is bad.
It's been wonderful.
No, it's been great. But then, you know, it's men saying like, well, how can I actually help with this, you know, which is not something I've seen a ton of in the past.
You are correct. So I'm just looking up, because I specifically did a tweet where I said, shout out to all the men in music I see on my timeline that are speaking up about this, because that is so different to see all of these voices chiming in. And bless Swizzy Mac, because he tweeted, if you tell women what to do with their body, you a bitch. I was like, yes.
Yeah, that's the voice we need. Yeah, shout out to Swizzy Mac, man. I was just talking to him the other day. I love that guy.
Yeah. In terms of like what people can do, though.
Yeah.
Because I think it's very, like you said, that we're at the point where more people are recognizing that they can chime in and have a voice, and maybe there's places for them to speak out, but what can you actually do? Right. And what I tell guys primarily, what they can do when it comes to making a music space that's more inclusive or friendly, because there's no downside to making dance more inclusive. We all benefit from having all these additional voices in the mix, right?
Yes.
And if you see something or you hear something, like if you're in a green room and you overhear somebody saying something that is not okay, to not be afraid to check that person.
Yeah.
Which I know is difficult.
But that's a huge key. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe this is a reach, but I think probably almost every artist who's been doing this professionally for a number of years has heard or seen something in a green room, in a backstage area, on the side of the stage that's not acceptable. Like it happens all the time.
Yeah. And it's hard because those spaces we think of them as spaces that are fun, but they're also professional working spaces at the end of the day. The green room, it is a place to let loose and have fun. It is a professional working environment as well. But there's no cameras generally. There isn't. There is an HR that we can report to.
Yeah,
right?
very true.
So the only monitoring we have is each other.
Yeah.
So that's very important.
And I mean, just in general, the community aspect is something I preach about on this show all the time. Like, if you want to be a famous DJ, what that means is that you will be part of a community that is bigger than just you, you know, and all the success, whatever, you know, say you're like the stereotypical, you just want to be a famous superstar, like all of that, those opportunities are given to you by this community, right? And if you want those things, you have to take care of that community.
Right.
And,
yeah. You get out what you pay in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the biggest key. I mean, the biggest piece of advice I could ever give anybody. I don't even care what you want to do.
Right.
It's just treating other people well, always being nice, you know, not
I talk with Will Runzel about this a lot.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to former guest on the show, Will Runzel.
Yeah, but I mean, that is something that's always on the forefront for him, because if somebody is booking a show and they had a really good first interaction with Will and they had a mediocre interaction with some other manager that reps some other acts, the person they're probably going to call is the person they had a good interaction with.
Absolutely. And I was just talking with a friend about this last night, is rather than sort of interacting with people, trying to size them up, figure out what they can do for you or what value they provide, if in the moment you're just another nice person and you have a great interaction with them, 2-3 years down the line,
it matters.
Yeah. And if something that you would be a good fit for occurs to them, they'll remember, oh yeah, that was a really nice person.
Right.
Like, I should hit them up.
What does it cost you to be nice?
Right.
Nothing.
It's insane that we have to even talk about
I
this.
know. I was just on the phone yesterday with an executive from one of the big 3 labels. I can't say who, but we were having this very long discussion about videos getting claimed on YouTube because it's a very contentious, boiling space right now.
Sure, yeah. People's content being taken down for copyright infringement that is sometimes not a great call.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the middle of the conversation, I just asked him, so what were you doing before this? And do you ever come to Chicago? And started asking him some personal questions. And he seemed pretty thrown by that I was actually invested in learning more about him
as a person.
Right. But that's the thing, is that you can't treat the relationships with these other people as transactional.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the worst mistake. And again, I understand why people do it. And I was definitely that way when I started, because you're just so excited and you want every opportunity possible. And, you look at what everyone else is doing and it's so exciting. You want to be a part of it. Like, I get it. But to take it back on track, so how did the DJing in Chicago evolve for you? Because, I think when we first met, it was that vibrant start of what would become the modern Chicago scene that sort of launched, all of us into wherever we ended up, right? There was you, there was me, there were people like Flostradamus, Matt Rohn, Cruella came a few years later. But, everyone was sort of just running around, playing shows every night, going to each other's shows every night, just going out in general all the time. Like, it felt like a weird misfit family in a way.
Totally did.
And for you, at that point in your life, were you looking at it as a career, a lifestyle? Like, what did you think you were going to be doing at that point?
I wasn't quite sure, but I sort of fell into getting more and more bookings, and it wasn't really an end goal, but because I was just so naturally interested and invested.
When did you start performing as a DJ?
I was 17.
Oh, okay. Still in high school.
Yeah. Yeah. I just found a really wonderful picture of the first rave that I ever played.
Oh, man.
Yeah. It was in an old hunting lodge somewhere in Wisconsin.
God, I love it.
No lighting. And if you zoom in real close in the photo, you can see I put a glow stick at the top of the mixer to light the knobs.
How was that first show?
I screwed up.
Sure.
I was so nervous.
Yeah.
I just ran out of vinyl. I couldn't mix in time.
Right.
But the crowd was super supportive because they knew it was my first show, and they just chanted for me to start over.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. It was super cool. So I did and made it through, and everything went great.
Okay, so you start DJing pretty young, and probably by the time I met you, I moved to Chicago around 2006, 2007, somewhere in there was when I started like DJing out a fair amount in the city. So you must have been DJing for years prior to that.
Yes.
In the city.
Yeah.
And were all of those gigs, was it just kind of like no expectation? This is a fun thing to do?
It was mostly residencies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How did that come about? I feel like getting like club residencies that early on and like that young is sort of hard to do.
Yeah. I got into this one bar with a group of people. Definitely should not have been in that bar. Was too young.
Yeah.
And saw they had a DJ there and was interested. So just asked to speak to the manager. And I was like, look, let me play for free one night. And if you like it, then you can pay to have me back. And they took me up on the offer, and that wound up being one of my first residencies for over a year. It was Joy Blue and Cherry Red, when those way back in the day.
Okay, I think club. I wasn't even there yet.
Whew, yeah, and had a residency with Excalibur.
Oh,
for a while. Yeah,
good old Excalibur, man.
And Vision.
Yep.
Les Passages.
Wow, Les Passages. taking me back. I think I had a residency at La Bassett. I forgot that.
That was a great club.
That actually was a good club.
Yeah. So a lot of it was residencies early on.
And so was it like
Sushi Samba?
Oh man, another place I never went to, but I would hear people talk about.
It sounds so droll because it's a sushi restaurant, but the parties were popping on the rooftop for ages.
Oh yeah, back in the day, man, the venue didn't matter so much. You know, there was less of an attitude about like, oh, you want to go there,
right? Yeah.
And so were these residencies like weekly residencies?
Yeah,
you were playing like multiple nights a week, every week.
Yep.
So you must have learned a lot in those years.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, do you look back on those times fondly? Was that
I guess there was also a downside. Those residencies really expected you to play a very long time. So there were a lot of nights where I would play for 5-6 hours straight. Yep. And that just after a certain point, it sucks.
It's tiring.
It's tiring.
And shout out to to this day, that's still a lane that a lot of DJs are in.
Yeah.
And like, as people who have done that before, that's a grind, man.
Yeah, I don't think people realize just how taxing that can be. It's like, oh, you're standing in one place. How tiring can it really be? But
well, it's like, I don't know, because DJing is like solving a puzzle or something, right? Like it's mentally, you're kind of doing gymnastics the whole time.
Yeah, you're conducting the atmosphere for the entire night.
Yeah. So now we're in sort of the blog house era, right?
My favorite.
Yeah. Well, and you had the blog.
Yes.
Right? What was the impetus to start the blog? Like, do you remember starting it up?
God, I don't even really remember why I wanted to start it. But I'd had personal websites and blogs for ages. I had a GeoCities website.
I also had a GeoCities website. I love GeoCities.
So I had a fair amount of knowledge about coding under my belt. And starting a WordPress website was easy at the time, and customizing it was also easy at the time because you could just grab a template and make it look however you wanted. And so I just started it because I had a lot of friends that were sending me tracks, and this was before SoundCloud embed, so I would have to upload everything to my server and figure out how to make them play on the website. And it just started gaining traction, and I would see the numbers continue to climb, and I applied to have it be aggregated in Hype Machine, which was at the time sort of so crucial.
Yeah, that was almost like the same thing that like being verified is now,
Yeah,
like,
if you were part of it.
If you wanted to have like a legit blog. You
you were Hype Machine.
Right.
But it's crazy. I mean, Hype Machine broke a lot of careers.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it was kind of like the Billboard charts now. If you were number one on Hype Machine, that really meant a lot.
Yeah, no, it meant a huge deal. I mean, people would get signed to record deals off of that.
For sure.
Crazy.
The Chainsmokers came off of having a bunch of hits on Hype Machine. I was one of the first people to post Party Favor, Valentino Khan, The Knocks. Yeah, early Chainsmokers, Kill the Noise.
Even back then, you were sort of influencing culture. Like it makes me think about what we were talking about earlier, where it's so easy to be focused on this one idea of success. But then you look back at a career, like even just what you've done to this point in your career, and the influence that you've had is so much wider reaching, right? And has affected so many other artists way more than, if you were just like the most famous DJ in the world, right? Like, I
appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I hope you feel that way. It's to me, that seems like a very obvious truth.
Yeah. I mean, I think that part of it, actually, I think most of it is really because I just so deeply cared about every project that I did. And because I deeply cared about the things that I was writing about, and I wasn't posting things because I owed anything to anyone. I posted them because I saw promise in someone, or it was just generally a really good track, or I made friends with people because I thought they were interesting and not because of what they could provide to me. And all of that has fed back into me having a platform and a voice that people respect and pay attention to.
Absolutely. And we talked about, how you got started writing for Herb, these other publications. was that happening at the same time as, you also coming up as a DJ, as a producer?
Yeah, it was all kind of linear. I did Herb first.
Right.
And then I was writing freelance for a bunch of places. Then the blog, really, when I was doing the blog full time, that really commanded all of my attention because we got to a point where there were hundreds of submissions coming in every few days. And
that's another aspect that maybe we should just talk about is that people would submit their music to be posted on your blog,
yes.
right? And at the time, that was a very exclusive kind of thing, right? Like
it was.
Getting your music posted on a blog was everything.
It was. Oh, I had like over a dozen people that were writing for me at one point, and they were all doing it for free.
You were like your own outlet, almost like your own publication in a way.
And we weren't charging for. Blogs got to a weird spot where they would say, "Oh, pay us a couple dollars for a submission, and we'll guarantee that we'll look at it."
Right.
Because nobody could figure out how to monetize it, and at a certain point, I couldn't handle the volume of it, and I had to eat and and put a roof over my head. And there were all these people that were donating their time, and they did it for the love of the culture as well. I mean, shout out people like Denman and Sam and all of these guys that contributed so much of their time over the years to help make that a reality. And it got to the point where I was like, this is wonderful. And, we are giving so much to the community, but Hype Machine's influence was waning. They had kicked off a ton of dance blogs at a certain point. And I had to move on to other things.
Well, and if you look at the state of blogs in 2019, I think you made the right move.
Yeah. That's very true.
I mean, it's sad out there, man. I mean, this is another thing I wanted to talk to you about because I think there's not enough people doing good, solid journalism in the dance music world anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I don't consider myself a journalist in any way, but part of even me doing this podcast was just me being mad about how garbage the discourse is about dance music, right? Mm-hmm. Every blog is turned into clickbait, more or less. Mm-hmm. They're all just trying to make their ad money or their click money.
Right. It's difficult. It's difficult to drive traffic now.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure that's something even you experience as far as, writing for legitimate outlets.
Oh, no,
right?
We don't have to worry about that.
Well, sure. Not with The Verge. I mean, You guys have a strong base. But was that ever, for anyone you've written for, was that ever, something that was discussed of, we could write about this, but maybe this will get more attention, or this is an important issue, but there's not a big hook to draw people in.
I mean, those are discussions that I still have with Verge every day.
Yeah.
There are things that I have to drop because there just isn't wow, look at the rain.
Yeah, I was going to say, are we hearing like a thunderstorm?
Yeah,
right now?
Look, it's going sideways.
Oh, Jesus Christ. How did that happen?
It's Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah, well, for all of our listeners, if you hear that, this is a major storm out here.
I mean, that's very typical of here.
Oh, yeah. It was beautiful like 20 minutes ago.
Right. And if it started hailing in an hour, I also would not be surprised.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. But yeah, having a sharp angle is something I think no matter the size of your publication, you're always concerned about. And there are stories that I would love to write, but I know that it's not worth the time or the effort, or it's not the right fit for us. Or there are times where I know something's a right fit and I have to convince other people that's a right fit. Like when I had to really fight for the story that was, remember when Gessa did the Vanta Black monolith at Coachella?
Oh, yeah. So Gesaffelstein's performance with the like crazy monolith thing.
That was covered in Vanta Black.
Right. So what is Vanta Black for the people who might not know? It
is a coating that absorbs pretty much 100% of any light that is directed at it. So the whole point was for him to look like he was performing in front of a black hole or a void, basically.
Right.
And I thought that was incredibly interesting. And a lot of people that I brought the story to at Verge were a little iffy on it. And I said, trust me, this is going to be amazing. This is so cool. They relented, and it wound up being the second highest traffic post on the site that week.
Wow. I mean, and to me, that seems like such an obvious, like, cool intersection of new technology and, like, you know, artist sort of at the peak of his powers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to talk to the CTO of Surrey Nanosystems, which is the company that actually makes Vantablack.
Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
That is really cool. And, you know, so we've been talking about sort of the path you've been on to carve out whatever space it is that you're currently occupying. Another thing I was thinking about when I was coming to talk to you was somewhere in this, you know, blog period, maybe when that was starting to trail off, like you were just talking about, was also when you were coming up a bit as a producer and as like a touring artist, right? Beyond just sort of Chicago and the region. And I remembered, which I'd totally forgotten, that you did this kind of like totally DIY nationwide tour.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about that, because that was just an interesting thing to me. What was that experience like? Like,
it was hard.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
It was very difficult. It was very time consuming. It took a lot of time and effort and sleepless nights and phone calls. And
so it was basically you reaching out individually to promoters in every city, right? And just bypassing all the mechanics of
figuring out what the nights were. So a lot of times it wasn't hitting up a club. It was, you would find the party that you would be applicable for in the city.
Right.
And then you would see what promoter heads up that night and then figure out who the person is that works for that promotion company and try to hit them up directly.
Yeah. A lot of research involved. So would I do it again? Not in that fashion. Yeah, of course.
But the wonderful thing now is that there are a lot of tools that enable people to operate in a more DIY space without some of the headaches that I had to go through.
Like what?
I think on the music releasing side, we have tools like AWOL and Cobalt and Amuse.
Sure.
Even SoundCloud does distribution now.
Yeah. There's, TuneCore and what's the other one?
CD Baby and
DistroKid.
Yeah, DistroKid. And so on that side, it's all becoming much more available. There's a lot of companies that will let you engage with fan bases and make money on your fan bases in unusual ways. So, I tell people, I'm like, think about how you can monetize every part of a fan's interface with you. So if you're working on a track, maybe you can unlock a Patreon stream where it's just a camera of you working in the studio.
Right.
And that's passive income. Right?
Yeah. The Patreon is great for that. Say, okay, you pay me $5 a month and that just unlocks this camera and you can watch me work and see how I do it.
No extra effort on your end.
Right.
Yeah. Or you could, for another level, maybe the people that subscribe get to have input on the name of your next track.
Sure.
Again, no extra effort on your part. And
that helps you build a community too, right? Because then you're interacting with people more. They feel like they're a part of your movement or whatever you want to call it.
Which is really important because I feel like there are a lot of these imaginary bridges that are being connected right now between fans and the artists, but not a lot of actual tangible communications. Like fans are being spoken at, not with. A lot of the time. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's a much more authentic connection too, because I think listeners have a much different idea of what a musician's life and even just personality is like than what it probably actually is most of the time. Whereas if you make those more direct connections and they can just see you and they're just like, oh, that's just a guy or a girl like sitting in their bedroom working on a thing. That to me is so much more relatable and makes me care about the person so much more.
This is why I hate the term personal brand. Throw that out the window. Just who are you as a human being? What do you stand for? What do you like? What do you not like? Just talk to people as a person, not as a brand. Forget your personal brand.
I love
that's
that.
Probably like the wrong advice to give.
Well, you're right. For some people, it probably is the wrong advice, but I think it's a lesson everyone could take to heart. Even if you are, the kind of personality where it would make sense for you to kind of I don't know, monetize your own personality. You still have to be relatable, right?
Right. And I think the problem I have with it is that term just dehumanizes everything.
Yes.
And you are a company, right? But at the end of the day, you are a human that is operating a company. And I think that's why I dislike the term personal brand, because you can't forget about your humanness and your connection with the people that are coming to the show, because
absolutely
they identify with what you stand for.
And that's, again, we keep coming back to these ideas, even more important in the era of corporate dance music, right? And authenticity being a more rare commodity. Mm-hmm. So, where are you at with it these days? Like how would you define what you do to somebody else? Because I think you occupy this really interesting hybrid space.
Oh yeah, I'm a classic multi-hyphenate.
Yeah.
Still DJ and produce. I'll be at Spring Awakening. And
love Spring Awakening.
I know, right? Love Spring Awakening. And then also, as I mentioned before, head up the music tech and music policy coverage for The Verge. And then also, I was a governor for the Chicago chapter of the Recording Academy, but I was just elected vice president.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. So I will move into that role shortly. And I am actually very surprised at how those two mutually support each other. So the work that I do for the Recording Academy is beneficial to the work that I do with The Verge and vice versa. They feed into each other. I
can totally imagine that. And you and I have had discussions before about the Recording Academy and why you're sort of an advocate to get more musicians involved in that world. Again, for the listeners who might not have any idea how a Grammy works, why is it important for musicians to understand the process of the Grammy world, the Recording Academy? Why should more musicians be involved?
Well, I think part of it is clarifying, first of all, that the Recording Academy is the Grammys. I think some people really don't understand that the Recording Academy produces the Grammys and they're associated with that award. But it opens up a lot of avenues and networks for you. I'm part of the P&E wing, the Productions and Engineers wing. So first of all, you do pay a fee. It's $100 a year. So one of the conversations I run into a lot is, well, why should I pay $100? Part of that is that you're helping to fund the Recording Academy is a nonprofit. Music Cares is a nonprofit. Your money is going to directly help and fund this network that supports musicians at the end of the day. And also, I think a lot of people in dance music, one of the hurdles that I get is, well, I don't know how I can participate. I don't think that it represents me. And, part of that I get, because the dance categories are not part of the televised process. We're what's called pre-tel. We're pre-tel categories. But, the categories are inclusive and represented when you participate in the process, right? So if you're unhappy with the way the ballot looks, you can change that.
Right. And it's worth saying, that $100 a year membership, what that gives you is a vote, right?
Well, yeah, it gives you a vote. And you're also, I like to really impress upon people that you're also helping to fund all these other efforts that support your community and musicians.
And that's maybe even the more important part. But all I was saying is, if there's someone out there who thinks, oh, the Grammy nominees are corny, that this doesn't represent what's really happening in my world that I think is important.
So change it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you can change it.
Right.
Yeah, you have to, there's an open season where you can sign up. And then you have to have 2 people vouch for you. They don't have to be Academy members, but they have to be people that are influential or important in the industry. Whoever the best voices are that you can get to say, this person should be a voting member. And then there's a review committee. And then we'll find out this year, I think in maybe a month or so, who the new crop of voting members are. But I nominated Michael Brune, who is an amazing Haitian dance artist who lives in New York, and Varian, who is an amazing K-pop primarily producer, but also composes for video games and writes dubstep, who lives in Florida.
Okay. That's a resume.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I mean, it's cool because that's such a wide range of perspectives, right?
Right. That's what we need.
Yeah. That will then probably over the years lead to a much wider range of artists being included in the awards.
We had such good ballots this past year. I don't know if you remember who was on the ballot.
Well, the big one that everyone, I think, in the dance world was talking about was that Virtual Self was nominated, right?
That was big, right?
Yeah, that was big for a record that is not very mainstream sounding that, I think dance music fans obviously loved because it was a great, important record that harkened back to a lot of the roots of where we all came from. But it didn't sound like a Grammy record.
But it was an important record.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're saying is that actually it was a Grammy record.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so how does that happen?
It starts from the top down. You have to have people at the top in headquarters that actually recognize that things need to be shuffled around, and you get new people on the committee, the screening committees and things like that are maybe a little more representative of what's fresh and new and happening. And so we have somebody that is in charge of pop and dance who I think is very in tune with what is going on. And she's done a fantastic job of picking the right people to be involved to help make sure that what people see on the ballot is representative of their community. And I want to stress that what appears on the ballot is not the result of secret committees. It is the result of voting members voting. But we do have committees that basically screen the music just to make sure that it's in the right category, for example. If something could be submitted to dance, but maybe it should be in pop instead. So we have some committees that sort and do things like that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it is about the people that vote.
Right.
Yeah.
And if somebody hears this and is interested in applying to be a voting member, getting more involved, where can they go? What's the best way for them to do that?
To the Recording Academy website. They currently cannot apply. They'll have to wait until later in the year. The application process is currently closed. They're, I believe, in the review process for the next class of voting members. But there is information on the website that tells you about what you'll need, the minimum amount of credits that you'll need in order to apply. So they're looking for people that have a certain amount of releases, but then they also are looking holistically at your career because they don't want some dentist that thought it'd be fun to release an album, right? They want people that are actively contributing, where being a musician is their primary focus, and they're a part of the community and their voice needs to be heard.
Fantastic. Well, and maybe I'll get the actual site address from you, and I'll put that in the description of this episode when we put it out, so everyone can go and check that out.
I'll nominate you for next year.
Hey, let's go. This has been really fun. Is there anything? I mean, we've been all over the place. Is there anything we haven't covered? Anything we should get out there? Anything that's been on your mind?
God, the thing that's been on my mind it's been awful.
I mean, we could talk about it.
I mean, not awful, but I have a feature that's going to be coming out next week, which is on the world of music metadata and how broken it is and how it is preventing songwriters all over the world from getting paid. And that is a strange, messy, diluted world.
It's extremely messy.
That no one knows about.
I actually have, maybe we talked about this, I have experience with that in a weird way because before I was doing this, the only kind of real job I've had in my life, a large part of it was entering metadata on song files manually back in the day when it was not all automated. Yeah, I would work for this company that put music on cell phones. And so we were kind of the middlemen, record labels would send us their catalogs. We would package it up and serve it up to phone carriers. And so, we would sort of design the storefront that would be on these, shitty mobile phones.
Right.
And I was actually chopping up songs to be loopable ringtones, doing all of it manually, and then manually inputting a lot of the metadata because what we would get from the labels was, garbage, more or less.
Right. And none of it's standardized.
Oh, none of it's standardized. And I was literally physically typing it. I probably made typos.
Right. I think a lot of people don't understand. I think most people think when they think of metadata, they're like, you just
define metadata
also,
first of all.
Yeah. Right. Because metadata can take many different forms. It's when you click on credits on Spotify for a song, technically what you see is metadata, but that actually has nothing to do with anything. That's just like a nice bonus that Spotify does.
Right.
Metadata is also the underlying information about a song that tells you who wrote the song, the performing artists attached to it, the label, the publishers, and then all of these weird kind of things called IPI and ISRC and all of these codes
these
that people...
identifier codes that are used on the back end for labels to track songs.
Right. Yeah. So all of this constitutes metadata. And the problem is there's no global codified way that we've all agreed upon when it comes to a style guide for entering metadata. And every country has different copyright laws and their collection societies operate differently. And so you could have a hit song in America. Let's say you did everything right, first of all, which is most people do
questionable.
not. Questionable. And you're getting everything you're due in the US, which is good for you because most musicians aren't even getting what they're due in their home country. If you had a hit that translated over to another country, you would have to rely on your collection agency having a relationship with the collection agency in that other country to make sure that you were getting the money that you were due. And very often that does not happen.
And this is outside, I think it's worth saying, this has nothing to do with like the label that you're on, you know, like it's a separate system.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's true. It's funny because I know too much for my own good.
Yeah, right.
I know too much. But yeah, a lot of people fundamentally don't realize that there are two copyrights that exist for each single song. There's the recording copyright and there's the composition copyright. So what you hear is a recording, but then there's this other side where credit is due to the people that actually wrote that song.
Right.
Yeah.
And those rights can be distributed differently. You know, the label could own the rights to the recording, but you hopefully own the rights to the composition, right?
Right. Yeah. And those are the people that generally get hurt the worst. Are the people on the composition side.
So is your story kind of just trying to like lay out, like, are you proposing a way to fix it or are you more just
I think there is no way to fix it. This was really shocking to me because I talked to so many executives for this. I talked to executives at Sound Exchange. I talked to executives at Song Trust. I talked to executives at Cobalt and
which are all these big companies that deal with this kind of stuff every day.
And a global database has been attempted 3 times.
Okay.
And each time it has failed in spectacular fashion.
Yeah.
And it's usually the same things. Smaller collection societies are worried that a global database would make them unnecessary. Larger collection societies are just worried it would hurt their profits.
Okay.
There's fighting between different arms of the industry because they can't agree on things like who should be in charge of the data?
Right.
Who verifies that it's correct?
Right.
Who owns that? Data's a commodity.
Of course, absolutely. There's value in it. And, you know, I think all of these players want to think of themselves as the top, right? Like they all want to be in charge.
Yeah, and data comes from weird places. There was one that was a big surprise to me. TiVo supplies the metadata for musicians' photos and certain other attributes on YouTube Red.
Oh, that is so weird.
Isn't that strange?
That is bizarre.
But TiVo apparently has an entire division of its company that is devoted to music metadata.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. I never in a million years would have thought that.
Right. And that's the thing that's also screwed up is that metadata comes from all these different companies that where the data is the commodity. And if it's screwed up in one place, then it's like, shoot, well, how many different places do we have to update the information?
Right.
Dozens, right?
Right. And the problem is if you're the musician who's not receiving your due because of some metadata problem, no one's going to come up and be like, oh, hey, I found this problem you should know about.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to suss it out on your own. And often you wouldn't even know that you're missing the money because payments can vary so wildly from month to month. It's hard to know if you're missing anything to begin with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I talked to one musician who is missing about $40,000 in back payments because there was a data transference error between two different collection societies.
That was it.
That was it. Going back 6 years, which had expired the terms of what he was able to collect. So they told him how much he was missing out on. And then it was, well, sorry, we can't do anything about it. Talk about a carrot on a stick.
That's a heartbreaker.
Yeah.
Well, man, I mean, I'm really glad you're out here investigating this kind of thing. I do feel like you're providing a valuable service. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's valuable for you personally. Like that's why I think people are engaging with it maybe more than they have in the past, mm-hmm. right? Is because you can tell you really actually care about it. We're uncovering these things that kind of everybody should know about.
And I also operate in a very unusual space where I have one of the biggest, well, two of the biggest, because the Academy and Verge. I have two of the biggest platforms to amplify my voice. But I also am a musician with credits.
Right.
So I bring a very unique voice that a lot of other music journalists or tech music journalists don't have or can't have or are unable to have because they don't operate in that space.
Absolutely. And that's, maybe that's a perfect example to sort of bring it on home is that this whole time we've been talking about, all these different ways we can, find our path and like blaze our trail, whatever you want to call it. And for you to get to where you are, you had to do everything that came before, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the path you've taken couldn't have really been predicted.
Well, if you look at the camps I went to as a kid,
yeah,
clearly
right. Okay, you're right. It was all predetermined.
But no, if you asked me as a kid if this is what I would be doing, this is not what I would have chosen. But I'm very happy with the work that I am doing because it all has been tied up with a neat bow at this point.
And I'm excited to see where it goes from here. I sort of feel like in some ways it feels like you're just getting started with, this new, I don't even know what to call it, but with like a new phase of what you're doing. It's exciting. I'm glad you're out there doing it. I think.
It's great, especially because most of even though I'm covering this stuff on these massive platforms, everything I do at the end of the day is for the benefit of the individual creator.
Right.
I try to make sure that everything I do speaks to the people, the musicians that would be affected by it the most. Like the investigative work with the SoundCloud contract or this metadata thing, which affects every musician that's out there. Or I did a report on AI and copyright, which is something that we all should be hyper aware of right now when it comes to music.
Yeah, and I will, for all the listeners, I'm going to link to some of these articles where you can go get into these stories deeper because it's well worth your time. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you for inviting me into your home. This has been really nice.
I'm sorry Crouton was being a little extra.
Oh, it's fine. I'm going to wrap it up by asking the question I ask at the end of each of one of these interviews. Just a simple question. You don't have to think about it too hard. Kind of the first thing that pops into your head.
You preface something with you don't have to think about it too hard, you automatically are saying, I'm going to be thinking about it.
I know. Well, you'll laugh when you hear the question. So all I want is the first thing that pops into your head, just a time in your life, a moment. And it could be from any time when you're a kid, it could be recently, any time when in a single moment, music really deeply affected you. And that's meant to be a very broad question. There's no real right or wrong answer, kind of just the first thing that pops into your head.
Oh, dang. You know what? Let me make sure I get the title of it right.
Okay.
We had Kimbra come in for What's in Your Bag.
Okay.
For the Verge.
Right. And that's the series where you're looking at
literally you have someone dump out the contents of their bag and explain
like what they travel with. And,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this was around the time of her latest album in 2018. And so I listened to the entire album. They sent it to me in advance, Primal Heart. And there was one song, I think it's the second song on the album, it's called Top of the World. And it was so freaking good. I had to listen to it on repeat, and then I put headphones on because I just inherently felt like there was a lot going on with the production that I wanted to pay more attention to. It is so slick. The way that they do all these little tiny production touches with the panning, the way, how high her voice sits on top of the low end. There's this massive separation, this gap with the middle frequencies that you don't see very often. It feels very airy and very powerful at once.
Right.
And I could listen to that song 1,000 times and never get tired of it.
Well, and I love a story like that because I think that's a perfect way to cap off this whole conversation is that, why does a song affect us? Why do we like the songs that we like? And so much of it is something you don't always think about. It's how was the song made, Not just what are the words or like how does the voice sound, but actually, somebody had to record this, somebody had to produce this, and there were thousands of choices made, right, before it gets to your ears. And that's the thing we never think about. And then
right, you only hear the end product.
100%. And I mean, again, I think that's a great answer from you, who is out here
God, it would be. Yeah.
showing us the shit that we hadn't thought about,
Yeah, I guess I actually voted for that song for the Grammys. I think it was one of my nominations for Single of the Year because I thought that the production on it was so extraordinary. It gives me goosebumps when I listen to it in good speakers.
Well, I love that. Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
It's great to see you. Great to catch up.
Same.
All right, cool. Well, I'll talk to you later. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, peace. All right, that's the show. Shout out to Dani. So fun to see you. So good to catch up. For everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed that. This was fun, man. I like talking about this kind of stuff on the show. Don't forget Dani's video series, The Future of Music, that she does with The Verge. Season 2 is coming in August. Season 1 available now, and the link is in the description of this episode. That's it for this week. I got to go record a different podcast right now. But while I do that, don't forget you can always reach out to me, backtobackpod@gmail.com or at Willy Joy or at backtobackpod on all social media. I hope you have a great week. Hope you have some fun. Hope you are successful at whatever you are attempting to do. Even if it's just sitting on the couch and avoiding all of your problems for a week. Good luck with that. Have fun. Take care of yourself. And I will see you next week. For Back to Back, this is Willy Joy. Peace.